Hello, and welcome to the Shepherds and Kings podcast. My name is Jacob Trelaw, and I'm the founder and the host of this podcast. We're all about trying to find balance in our Christian life. Balance is that middle point of being all the things that we need to be. It's finding our priorities and putting them in the right order. It's having a healthy amount of fear and also the right amount of courage. It's working the right amount and resting the right amount. It's being able to fast and being able to feast. And that's what we're looking for is just that balance. So if you've listened before, thanks again for tuning in. And if this is your first time, we're glad that you're with us. We do appreciate you listening. I know I just saw we have people listening now in the United States, in Canada, in Mexico, in the United Kingdom, and in Laos, of all places. So I appreciate those of you who are listening, and I really appreciate you passing this along to someone else and helping some other man be encouraged, or just finding one little tidbit of truth. Again, I'm not the source of any or all wisdom, really, but just trying to talk about some things that I know I need to hear, and if I need to hear them, I know that someone else probably needs to hear them as well. So I appreciate those of you who've contacted me, given me some texts or messages or other kinds of encouragement or feedback. I appreciate that. So thank you for doing that. If you haven't left a review already, especially on Apple Podcasts, please try to do that. And then, of course, if you have suggestions or feedback, you can Facebook message me or Instagram, all those kind of things. I appreciate that at any point. So today we're going to talk about taking responsibility and the buck stopping at your desk. One of the most famous Psalms is Psalm 51. David coming before God and talking about what he's done. He's taking responsibility for it, really. And he had to be confronted by Nathan for it, of course, but at the end of the day, he came to God and said, I've sinned. It was me. It's my fault. I'm taking responsibility. He was owning up to his mistakes and making sure that, no one else could take the blame. And his example of taking responsibility is one of the greatest things, that we as men need to understand. Most of us, we take responsibility for certain areas, but usually those are the easier ones. It's us taking responsibility for our yard. We take responsibility for the things that we know that we can do well. So of course we take responsibility for the easy things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we need to learn to also take responsibility for the things that don't go well, for the areas that are tougher to say, yeah, that was my fault, the mistakes, really. And what makes a man is the one who takes responsibility for everything that is his. All that falls under his umbrella is his responsibility. And I know also it's a tough, thing to do, to say, yeah, that was me, I totally messed that up. But at the end of the day, you do feel better about yourself when you get to say, yep, that was me, but I'm going to fix it. There's something that you're able to prove to yourself at that point. Everything around you really starts to improve, even marginally, as soon as you start to take responsibility. That's just the way it works. Your performance at work, your impact on the world spiritually, your financial situation. Once you start taking responsibility and saying, you know what, it all ends here, or it all starts here, it grows when you take responsibility for the part that is yours. It just naturally does. That's the way it works. And so if you're not taking responsibility, you're probably not at the point that you need to be in whatever area you're in. I don't know what it is, but if you're not taking responsibility for it, it's not growing like it should. But if you say, like David did, I have sinned, not it's her fault for being on the roof, or, I needed a break from the battlefield. No, he said, you know what? I have sinned. It's my fault. And I already know, because I've had this thought too, that, if you're telling me that if I take responsibility for my marriage, my wife is going to stop doing whatever it is. And no, not necessarily. Might not be the case, depending on what it is. But ultimately, that's putting responsibility back on someone else, isn't it? That you're saying, I'm going to do my part, but it's really not stopping with you. Ultimately, responsibility is saying, I'm dealing with my part, and that's it. Whatever happens because of that is whatever happens. It doesn't matter what the other side of the equation is. You do what's your job and your task, and put the rest in God's hands. And so as a man, what are some things that we can do and some ways that we can look at taking responsibility? Well, the first thing is pay more attention to the things that can only happen because of you than the things that will happen without you. Pay more attention to the things that can only happen because of you than the things that will happen without you. You as a man should be focused on the things that need you to operate correctly. Your kids need you. They're not going to make it without you, at least not in the same way. Your wife needs you. Your marriage will be a shadow of what it could be unless you take responsibility for it. Your walk with God can't happen without you. Actually, walking with God, you have as much of God with you want. He promises to draw nigh to us as we draw nigh to him. And if you're not taking responsibility for that, it's not going to happen. Taking responsibility means focusing on the things that can only happen with me. And, I'm all for having hobbies. I love reading. I like making music. I like playing sports. But if it comes down to, I'm going to skip playing basketball to spend some time with my son because he needs it, then I will. Because that can't happen without me. Basketball is going to go on without me. The Packers are going to play and probably lose without me. They don't need me. But if I get a chance to watch it, yeah, I will. But if it's more important for me to do something else, then that's what I'm going to do, because I need to pay attention to the things that can only happen because of me or with me. Our families need us to take responsibility for what happens in our house. And that's what we see a lot in the world around us. We see men taking responsibility for their video games. And again, I just sold my Xbox 360, relatively recently. But the Super Bowl is going to happen whether we watch it or not. But our kids are not going to be the same if we don't spend time with them. And I'm not saying you have to make that choice every single time. I'm just trying to get you to think what choices you might have to make and be ready to make them and be aware enough that that choice is sometimes there. But learn to take responsibility for the things that can only happen because of you. Your project at work might not get done without you. And so take responsibility and pay more attention to the things that can only happen because of you than the things that will happen without you. Next, learn to recognize excuses. One of the things that we're great at as human beings is justifying things to ourselves. I'm really good at that. I give myself a reason for just about anything that I do. Like I'm trying to eat better right now, and I'm really not doing a good job here in quarantine because, it's so much easier to order pizza and it's comforting and whatever else it is. And so that's what we do. So I worked hard all day. I'm coming home from the office and I deserve a break, really, is what it is. You know what I mean? Like I have to have that time. I don't need to spend time with my kids. I need a break because I deserve it. Don't look at this necessarily in black and white because yes, you might need a break, but you have to look at it in perspective, with what's going on at home. But anyway, but we have a tendency to kind of talk ourselves into these things. I shouldn't have to deal with the kids right away. I'm going to do my honey-do list later. I'll connect with my wife later, and that may all be true, but just if that is true, don't let it be an excuse for not doing something right now. Learn to recognize excuses for what they are. Try to get in the mindset of listening for your own excuses. Try to hear what you're telling yourself about reading your Bible, or about not loving your wife the way you should be, or not taking care of your finances, or about not getting up to work out, or about your sporadic church attendance, or whatever it is. Listen to yourself when you talk to yourself. That's maybe a weird way to say it, but listen for those excuses that you are inevitably going to give. And you'll start seeing them coming a mile away. You know it's going to happen. Be ready for them. Pull out that sword of action and kill the giant of excuses. Just get ready to deal with it because you know it's coming. Next, start with the black and white. Don't get sucked into the possibilities first. Deal with the facts first. Okay. And I'm all for possibilities and hypotheticals and things, but we have to deal with facts first. So, for example, you should eat healthier. Gray area is I'm too busy to eat healthy. So the problem with the gray area is that that's usually always partly true. Yes, you are busy. Yes, it does take time away from something else to plan and prepare healthier foods. Yeah, it is hard, but the black and white says I do need to eat healthier, so I will. The busyness, the gray area, doesn't factor into whether or not I do need to eat healthy. That's black and white. It only factors into what I need to overcome. So if it's important, take responsibility for it, get it done. Deal with the gray areas later. The gray area says my marriage relationship is bad, but I don't know why. And my wife isn't trying, so why should I? Black and white says, my marriage needs help. I want my marriage to succeed, so I will take the steps to improve all of the areas in my control. The gray area says, I might fail if I take a step for God. Black and white says, God has called me to take this step, and he has kept every promise to me so far. So think in the black and white. Here are the facts. I'll leave the possibilities for later, because I'm all for dealing with what could happen. I'm all for having a plan. I am. Recession comes. Fire comes. That's why we have insurance. Death comes. Taxes come. All these things that we do need to prepare for. But I cannot live my life in fear, and I cannot, more than anything, allow that to take away from me taking responsibility for what is mine. Next, ownership now leads to satisfaction later. There's nothing that leaves us as men more dissatisfied than living a passive lifestyle, allowing someone else to live our lives and make our decisions for us. We get, sometimes it gets easier to do that, but realistically, we want control, and we should want to have that buck stop at our desk. Now, and that's part of the reason why video games are so popular, is because it is a world that you can manipulate to your own liking in a lot of cases. And men can't take control in their workplace because they're not putting forth enough effort. They're not taking control in their marriage. And so they are, they're either too weak, too passive, too lazy, whatever it is, to take control. So they manipulate this other world. Leonard Sachs has a great chapter on this in his book, Boys Adrift. If you get a chance to check that out, it's a really good book. Men need action and a purpose behind that action to feel worth. We need, like David in 1 Samuel 17:32. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. David charged ahead. He knew the cause. He wasn't going to sit by passively while someone else mocked his God and his people. He took ownership. He said, I'm dealing with this now. And taking ownership is scary. And that's why, the Bible tells us the armies of Israel were dismayed and they were greatly afraid. But can you imagine being one of the thousands of men who sat there for 40 days listening to Goliath's taunts and having to go home afterwards and tell your family, tell your son that you didn't do anything about it? And I know that's like a tough challenge, because there are days where I sit by and I don't do anything. So that's a challenge to me too. But Goliath's taunts would echo in my head after that. If I didn't take ownership, it would make me question if I was brave enough or strong enough. Could I have taken down Goliath? Would I have been up to that challenge? I don't know. But that's what happens to us if we don't face the challenge, if we don't take ownership, if we don't take responsibility. We're not going to be the kind of shepherd we need to be. We're not going to find balance in our lives if we don't take ownership now. Ownership means I did what I could while I could. And whether or not it failed, at the end of the day, it's better for me to have taken that risk and known that I had enough courage to take that risk than to not have ever done it. Situations are all different. But when it comes down to it, let's take responsibility. Shepherds take responsibility for their flock. Kings take responsibility for their people. Let's take responsibility. Let's put this into immediate action. Grab a piece of paper and a pen, or just sit down and think about this. But first, think about or write down all the things that cannot happen without you. These are important things, but they need you as a part of it to be better or to be the best that they can be. These areas will be different in every man's life, but you need to figure out these things have to happen or can only happen because of me or with my involvement. Next, write down or think about some excuses that you have given yourself or that you will give yourself for not taking responsibility in these areas. You already know what they are because you've been telling yourself these excuses for as long as you can remember. So have I. I already know when I get to this point what I'm going to say to myself. And so when you see it's coming, identify it, articulate it, be ready for it the next time you decide to take action and take responsibility for something. Find out what those excuses are. Next, identify the black and white, the facts. Don't dwell too much on the hypotheticals or the possibilities, at least not first. Deal with the hypotheticals later, but deal with the facts first.